policy, actually. I was principal of the oldest high school in the United States, which opened in 1630, which is decidedly different than this place in several ways, because the mental model that we have from schooling is, well, A Nation at Risk, if you probably read about it in the paper sometime, you probably don't know what it was, but it was a big study that was done in the 1980s, and the whole point of A Nation at Risk and the 5 people that worked on it was that whether you're in a private school or public school or wherever in the United States, everybody has a very mental model about what a school should be like. The point of High-Tech High is not that we think that the world needs more High-Tech High. What we think is that what the world really needs is more differentiated schools and much more experimentation in schooling. So it's interesting that Mike had just mentioned, he just came right up and mentioned Bucky Fuller, and I just had a quote right at the top of my thing from Bucky Fuller, who when I was an undergrad I actually got to meet. And I was telling Mike he and I had something in common. We were both, Bucky and I, we were both born severely cross-eyed. So it's really fun, like if I ever like point to someone in the back of a big audience, and then the person always goes like that. I said, no. And they go, oh, you, okay. And you can't say, you know, the guy in the suit that's 2 sizes too small, that doesn't work either. But at any rate, so but Bucky Fuller said, a designer is an emerging synthesis of artist, inventor, mechanic, objective economist, and evolutionary strategist. Very apropos. So what we have in schooling is basically this mix of stability and churning. And a lot of parents really want churning. They really want stability because they're really, really worried. And I'm sort of tilting, especially from the oldest school in the country, much more towards churning. I learned from DSEG in Boston and involuntary when I saw people throwing bricks at babies in buses, just like Mississippi, and in voluntary DSEG in Cambridge, where I came from, well, we had Plessy v. Ferguson in the 1890s, in which the Supreme Court said separate but equal. And we had Brown versus Board in 1954, in which the Supreme Court said together and equal. We are neither separate and equal, nor are we together and equal. In fact, in 1954, the Supreme Court said that separate facilities are inherently unequal, which I happen to agree with. So what we decided to do, because there is a law called Proposition 209 in California, which I don't agree with, but that's the way it goes, forbids the use of race or ethnicity for selecting anybody for a public institution. So what we do here to accept children, which is highly audited, is that kids get in purely by zip code. That's all we know about them. If you don't believe it, I think they haven't done the lottery yet, right, Cindy? So you just go online and look. That's all we know about you is your address. So we look at census data, which is cool in terms of Prop 209. It's federal data. This is how many percent of kids live in Barrio Logan. This is the percent of kids that live in La Jolla. This is the percent we get from Barrio Logan. That's the percent we take from La Jolla. We actually do have people from La Jolla trying to get in. We have about 8,000 people in the lottery every year. The lottery picks you only by percent of zip code. So if, for example, it would never take somebody who is a sibling over from a fully represented zip code over a non-sibling from an underrepresented zip code. It would take a sibling from a underrepresented zip code over a non-sibling. So this is something we've given a lot of thought to. So that's a demography. That's what we're trying to create here. We're a charter school. I was talking to somebody who's the head of the Charter School Association recently in my chair sitting, and he said, he said, I want you to do this. I said, why? He said, you're a charter guy. I said, I'm not a charter guy. He said, you run some of the best charters in the country. I said, I'm sitting in a chair right now. I'm not a chair guy, okay? Like, I use chairs, I use charters. It's like, you know, I'm a public education guy. Charter schools are public schools. We get the same amount of money that public schools get. We are non-denominational, non-religious, and so that's how people get here. To give you an idea about this particular building, it is 39,000 square feet. It should have under whether you go by San Diego standard, where there's 187 schools and about only 10 of them have roof cafeterias. Why? Because of the weather here. And cafeterias are very big things you don't need to build. So whether you have a national standard, which would be about 260 kids, or a San Diego standard, about 380 kids, we have 592 kids if you were here in the building. And that's how we've survived all the cutbacks in California. In the last 2.5 years, in this building, with that demography, there have been 2 one-day suspensions and 0 expulsions. Expulsions have happened because under the California Education Code, if you have a knife, that is a locking knife, and over 3.5 inches long, you must be expelled. And unfortunately, we've had a 2nd grader do that, and we've had a 6th grader do that. And that, by the way, does not mean that they can't come back again. It just means that they have to leave. That's the law. So that's pretty much who we are. And the data that we decided would be the data that we really cared about was 4-year college completion rate data. Why? I have a lot of colleagues where I used to teach back in Cambridge at Harvard who think a lot of them are saying everybody shouldn't necessarily need to go to college. I know a lot of people who are programmers that didn't need to go to college. I get that. My argument about hominem response to them is the only people who are saying everyone doesn't need to go to college are never talking about their own children. And so what we're trying to do is prepare children so that they're not being segregated from those who are going to college, and they're being prepared so that they might be. And it turns out that the last time we've checked, which was something now we have called the National Student Data Clearinghouse, fortunately, and we don't have the newest numbers, so I don't know what they're going to be, but basically in the mid-80s% of all of our graduates across all subgroups have graduated from a 4-year college in 6 years. We always use a 6-year window because it's hard in the UCs, for example, to get everything done in time. 17% of the undergrads in the United States major in science, technology, engineering, and math. I don't know whether that's a good thing or not, but about 36% of ours do. And it's not because we tell them to, it's because they're making things and building things and doing the kinds of things that you do, which makes them really kind of interested in it rather than not interested in it, right? So, in fact, the thing that really, I sometimes think, like, where did it really start for me in my whole checkered past? There was a settlement house in Cambridge. Settlement houses on the East Coast, for those of you who know them, were for immigrants 100 years ago. There aren't really settlement houses on the West Coast, but it was a suffragette, Margaret Fuller, who in the 1880s, and she built this really big, huge home, and then downstairs became a public space where working class kids came out of school after school, and they played dodgeball downstairs and whatever. And dating myself, I was building a lab for printing photographs upstairs among the beams. By the way, doing big beam work is really fun. And the kids would come at 3 o'clock, and they'd been in school, and they could play dodgeball and go totally nuts downstairs, but they heard me making noise upstairs, and they started trickling upstairs to see what I was making noise about. And then they kept coming up there, and I kept showing them what I was doing, and I started to show them how to use tools. And then I realized I was really looking forward to 3 o'clock. It was my favorite part of the day. And then I started to realize that these kids were out of school and they could go nuts downstairs and do whatever they wanted to, but they would rather make something that wasn't there before rather than just be fooling around. And that's when I started to think about this whole idea of making. And I've been doing it ever since. So we made a couple of MOOCs with the help of some other people. I did one. We did one with the MIT Media Lab on deeper learning. We did one with Cal Berkeley on new school creation. Interesting that there are 1,500 graduate schools of education in the United States, and when I taught at Berkeley, it was the only course that I am aware of in the country at a graduate school of education on how to start a school, which tells you a lot about graduate schools of education. And we started one here. I don't know why, but we created a graduate school of education. It was one of my ideas. I'm not so sure it was one of the best ideas, but we did, okay, to try to deal with some of that issue. But at any rate, I do digress. So then we decided to do a MOOC, which we did with Google Course Builder, because one of our faculty here left to build Google Course Builder, which went to edX. And in that MOOC, I'm going to show you a little piece of it. In that MOOC, we had kids on the panels, and it was really fun. I mean, sometimes, you can already tell I'm someone who's really comfortable, like, talking to myself, right? So, but then I'd be doing the MOOC on Wednesday nights late, and I remember one night when 4 questions came in live. The first was Netherlands, the second was Turkey, the third was Kenya, and the fourth was Thailand. I'm thinking, these people are awake? And we had kids on the panels, like some of the kids that you just met, and the feedback on the MOOC was, the kids are so great, the kids are so great, the kids are so great. So we're just finishing a MOOC right now, which we're doing with Coursera, on Coursera, which is called How to Teach Us and it's by kids telling adults how they should be taught. Which is, and there's some, I was going to show you some pieces of that, but I thought I'd show you something else instead. So we animate